1.
All right, today we're going to recognize the properties of identity and equality, and we're also going to recognize the commutative and associative properties. So you have some vocabulary today. The first is equivalent expressions, and what those are expressions that denote the same value, because that's equivalent, that's equal, for all values of the variables. Your next definition is for additive identity, and this is for any number, anything plus 0 is equal to that number. So the identity property for addition is just adding 0 and it makes it the same thing. So for example, if I take 4 and add 0, it's going to be the same thing. That's the identity property of addition. Multiplicative identity is anything times 1 would be that number. So in this case, if it's 4 again, if I multiply by 1, it would be 4. So the identity properties are just starting with a number and ending with the same number. With addition, it's adding 0. With multiplication, it is times 1. And then we have the multiplicative property of 0. For any number, if I multiply it by 0, I get 0. So any number, if I take 4 again, times 0 would be 0. Reciprocal is the multiplicative inverse of a number. So if I have 4, the multiplicative inverse would be 1/4. And if you'll notice, if I multiply these two by each other, I'm going to end up with 1. So multiplicative inverses always will multiply to be 1. And you see that right here in multiplicative inverses, two numbers whose product is 1. So these two are inverses of one another. This is the reciprocal of 4, and they would then have a product of 1. So what we're going to do is take those properties and then apply this to the order of operations that you did yesterday. And we'll start first with our original equation. As you can see, I'm just rewriting it. And what we're going to say is given. Your first step is going to be given. Now, if you wanted to make a chart like I have here, that will keep your work a lot more organized. Or you could have it on regular paper, but you really have to have every single step identified. So in order of operations, the first thing we're going to do is parentheses. So I now have 7 times 1 minus 1 plus 5. I still have to rewrite everything else. You do one thing at a time, one step at a time. So to get from this parenthesis to this is what we call substitution. And if you want to abbreviate that just with sub, you totally can. So substitution is just taking this value from simplifying here. Now if I work from left to right, the first thing I see is multiplication. So 7 times 1 is 7. I'm going to do that first. This was a specific property. If you remember, this times 1 would give me the same result. That's multiplicative identity. And you can abbreviate if you'd like, as long as you have enough letters so I know what you're saying. Now as you look from left to right, we do all the multiplication and division first. So this is 7 minus 1 plus 5 times its reciprocal, which is going to be 1. 5 times 1/5 is 1, and so that property is your multiplicative inverse. And like I said, you can abbreviate, but remember you have to have a few more letters so that I know which is which. Now we work from left to right. 7 minus 1 is 6. That is just substitution because that's not a special property to subtract 1. And then we have 6 plus 1, which is 7, and that is also a substitution. I meant substitution here as well. So you have all of your steps identified. You're going to get credit for having each step identified and each property correctly identified as well. So you will practice one on your own. Commutative property is for any numbers. I can switch the places of the two numbers and I get the same result, and that works for addition and multiplication. So let me just do a multiplication example. If I do 4 times 5, that would be the same result as taking 5 times 4. Commutative is just switching the places. Associative properties are when you have groups. So here I've grouped 2 addends, and here I group the other 2, but yet I get the same result. Here I have 2 factors, and on the other side I have another 2 factors. So in associative, if I do multiplication, I could take 4 times 5 first and then multiply by 2, and that would be the same as 4 times the product here of 5 times 2. Now, I'm going to tell you how I remember the difference between associative and commutative, okay? And I know this is kind of bad, and I don't want you to think worse of me, but You see the first three letters of associative, okay? This is the one that has parentheses, and if you look, what does that look like? Okay? So I remember associative, because of this, has the parentheses. Commutative doesn't, it's just switching places, okay? Now we're going to do the same thing we did earlier. We're going to apply those steps in this situation. So we start with 5 times 7 times 4 times 2, and that is given. When you rewrite the problem, we call that given. Now I'm going to rearrange to make this easier for me, and I want to make a group of 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange and make this 7 times 5, and if you will notice, that was just switching places, so that's commutative, specifically of multiplication. And then I'm going to switch these two places, and I have 7 times 5 times 2 times 4, that's another commutative. And then I'm going to group these two together first. So I have 7 times this group times 4, and that would be 7 times 10 times 4. And so that's associative. And then you can multiply from left to right. 7 times 10 is 70 times 4, and this is going to be just substitution. And once again, this is just substitution. And then that's how you would get 280. Okay? So you will show every single property for every single step. Keep it very organized.